Good morning, everybody. It's we said it's a difficult. Yeah, it's a difficult topic this morning, but we are happy it's not just after the lunch. So the power of infrastructure asset data to attract investment. I'm Christian Chavanel, the director of the UIC Railway System Department. It is the technical department of the UIC, and we have 200 members working on 5 continents. We manage 137 working groups with more than 2,000 experts, and notably we have experts on data and on asset management. The UIC encourages, through its vision of Rail 2030, called Design a Better Future, the allocation of funds to invest in the improvements of multimodality, infrastructure, rolling stock, and services, as well as innovation to decarbonize operations in order to drastically increase the number of trains, the number of passengers and freight carried worldwide. To achieve these objectives, we'll need more capacity, quality of service, and continuous improvement of railway services and innovation. You can understand that asset management will be essential for both streamlining processes and investment decisions. That is the reason why I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hermann Orth, Manager Strategic Asset Management from AFRY and Management Board member. Hermann is an expert in railway infrastructure asset management and funding, as well as strategic service planning. He can draw from a long experience in consulting and research gained through supporting numerous clients across Europe. His background is in civil engineering with a PhD in transportation. Just after, I will present a short explanation concerning data, asset management, and artificial intelligence, and then it will be possible for me to introduce Mr. D. Waddell. D. Waddell is Global Managing Director, Travel and Transportation at IBM. Dr. D. Waddell is responsible for leading global hackathons in developing and delivering industry-leading solutions and services for airports, railroads, freight carriers, logistics providers, port authorities, hotels, cruise lines, car rental companies, travel agents, and global distribution system. Dee has extensive leadership experience in the travel and transportation industries, having served in senior business and technology global leadership roles at Amtrak, United Airlines, and Universal Weather and Aviation. He's a lifelong learner and holds a doctorate in management and BA in information systems from the University of Maryland, University College, and an MBA in strategic management from the Illinois Institute of Technology. He is also fluent in Japanese, having lived in Japan for 6 years. He currently resides in Utah, USA. So I give the floor to Hermann first. With a presentation called Data-Driven Strategic Asset Management for Railways. So,
thank you very much. I see we're still growing in attendance. That means the organizers put together a very good event last night. So I'll try my best to wake you up a little bit and talk about what we can do in railways with strategic asset management. Are the slides on? They're on? Okay, good. So basically, I would like to talk about what the monitor is. Yeah, but I think I'll just work on this one. The key is here, how can we use data for strategic asset management? That means in funding negotiations and planning strategically our work, not weeks or months ahead, but years and decades ahead, because we've got a very long lifetime, long asset living industry. And just, let's say, the quick introduction, who are we actually? We AFRY, we are a technology and engineering design and consulting firm. We've got roughly 16,000 experts worldwide, and my team, we are part of the asset management systems. We've got 60 people. We have a focus on the transport industry with a big, or I think very nice portfolio of clients in the railway industry, railway infrastructure. We're quite proud that our decisions help drive decisions on roughly 500 billion euros worth of assets in the railway industry. With that out of the way, what's our vision? What's the key for strategic data-driven asset management? And I'd like to start with what I call a journey. We come from a world where oftentimes the systems we have, the processes that we have, they're kind of opaque, they're reactive, and they're not very integrated. And we would like to move that into something that's integrated, that's proactive, looking forward, and that's also very quantitative. And this means across the entire range, from the asset management itself, in the core sense, to renewal and maintenance plannings, to funding, to budgeting, all the way to also forecasting. That we move from something that is silo-specific, use-specific, where we have very complex, very advanced methods for specific uses, to something that consolidates beyond that and can give you insights on a portfolio level. Because ultimately, if you simply said, have an asset that is condition grade 4, that should mean in terms of funding, in terms of reinvestment, the same for a piece of track, for a piece of switch, for a bridge, or a signaling system. Because ultimately we have to be able to drive portfolios, and that means we have to make decisions across portfolios consistently, regardless of what piece of portfolio we are looking at. And the framework that our clients work with here is a 3-layered framework, ultimately, and this is basically the core task here is you start off with data, but data by itself, it doesn't do much. It sits in your database, and that's all it does. So to go up, you have to actually, from the data, generate insights, learn from that, to have those insights ultimately drive decisions. And that means on a data level, you have obviously the asset data, we have accounting data from ERP systems, operational data, lifecycle management, cost data, and we have to all bring that together to first evaluate, make it comparable, make it consistent, so that we can have really a high level of control, what condition are our assets in. And to do that, we need to be able to also have some kind of data quality management, meaning a very conscious approach, automated approach to how good is our data actually, and how good are the insights, because if we put bad data in, we're not going to get very good insights out of it. And this means also, in terms of the organization, in terms of capabilities, what we as organizations need to have, we have to have people that work in processes that are built around data, that think in data, to have a mindset that really works with the possibilities of what we get today. Because that ultimately, that enables us to get to have a really good overview of our inventory, and not just how much of what we have, but also what condition is that in. Because then we can make judgment about what work do we need to do, how much maintenance, how much renewal, when, where, and then bring in the cost. How much is that going to cost us, when and where? And this is all information we need to ultimately drive our portfolios on a strategic level. And that means making decisions about what to prioritize, where to prioritize, also what capabilities to build up, to ramp down on, how much to buy maybe from suppliers, how to do ourselves. Really, this kind of decision making needs us to have a very, very good understanding of what type of work is coming in the future and where we would like to put that. And simply said, I'm trying to consolidate this, is what we want to create is a single point of truth when it comes to asset information. That means taking the portfolio data, the accounting data, and what you get oftentimes today, if you ask different people the same questions, you're going to get different answers. And that's something that obviously we can't really have in a world that's getting more and more transparent. So if you properly consolidate your data across systems, and not just, let's say, sensors into your asset management systems, but link in your ERP systems, link in traffic control systems, operational control and reporting, to get really a full overview of how your infrastructure is performing and how much work you need to do. You do get to unlock quite a lot of capabilities in planning, in forecasting, in prioritizing the activities you have to do, the funding that you need to do. It helps you in regulatory reporting. We know in Europe a lot of our clients are subject to government reporting on being accountable for how much funding is spent, how much funding is needed, what it is needed for. And obviously this is something that you would like to have in a very consistent, very transparent manner to create trust, but also to create a good understanding of why there's a certain need for funding to get that across and ultimately succeed in getting the funding that's needed to keep the infrastructure running at a good condition. Also quite important, review maintenance that's being done. If we outsource as an industry a lot to maintenance providers, we need to be able to control not only their cost and their quality, but also are they actually doing the right thing in the right quantity on the right types and pieces of the assets. So we need to have some kind of notion on what is it that we expect them to do, that they should be doing to keep their portfolio going. And lastly, what's actually the effect of underfunding? We oftentimes we battle with budget cuts, and especially the last 2 years have been tough on public finances. So we need to be able to have a good understanding of, if we save money today, how much is that going to cost us in the future? And also for that, we need to have a really good way to describe our portfolios and to describe the cost that arises from running our portfolios. So just a few anecdotes, the learnings that we've been able to work on to get out of data together with our clients. What you'll oftentimes see, if you can optimize the lifetimes of your assets, you will find some assets can live much longer than originally planned for, and that's a direct savings on your capital expenditure. Another case, if you have a good guidance on how much work you're going to do in the long run on your portfolio, you can steer, you can guide your suppliers to build up capacity. There's one case we saw, we had a client that had a huge ramp up in construction needs for very, very special types of constructions. They had not done that before, so the industry wasn't really in a position to ramp up, to deliver. And then what you get is supply and demand, prices have gone up like crazy, 30% in that case, and obviously we don't want that as well. So if we can give longer term guidance, if we can plan better, we can have more stable relationships with our partners, and we can have also a more stable funding, ultimately leading to better cost in that. And then the last 2 points, and this is really coming to one of the things we as an industry constantly battle, it's funding for renewal. It's really important to see what condition is our portfolio in terms of how much do we have in terms of backlog actually, and what is the backlog costing us today in terms of, let's call it excess maintenance, because old assets generate more maintenance, more corrective work than new assets and assets that are kept within the reasonable technical lifetime. And so this is a few anecdotes of insights you can get out. There's a certain journey to getting all these things in place. And oftentimes we see 3 levels. You start off quite basic with what we call core capabilities. They mostly focus on reporting. And that means being able to describe what condition is your portfolio in today, combined with a very good drill down capability, because ultimately we want to model portfolios not as a, let's say, aggregate model, but really based on the assets that we've got in those portfolios. So really bottom up. That means then once that's in place, we can go to something that's more advanced, and we can start actually getting some forecasting in. That means having activity models, that means having cost models for the work that we are doing on our portfolios to get some foresight in what is it going to cost us in the future. The key challenge here is really to link up system, because if you look at cost, you need to have a good grasp of cost. You need to be able to follow up on cost and link that up with your accounting system, with your ERP systems ultimately, to, in the end, get to what we call your excellence full forecasting. That means running scenarios on your portfolio, test out different strategies, as well as really answer the question, what happens if I don't get funding? What happens if I get more funding? What can I do with that very specifically, so that we have a very tangible way of understanding what are the effects of the support we can get for our portfolios. Naturally, getting there, that's not always easy. There's 4 challenges we keep running into really across the board. And one's data quality, data completeness. As an industry, the public image may be a different one, but as a railway industry, we are quite innovative. We have had data users for decades, but that also means oftentimes we were the first ones to make some kinds of mistakes. So there's history to systems, and that's why it's important to have a really good control of data quality and manage that in a very conscious, proactive way, and not just use what's there. Second, integration. Integration across everything in data, not just the asset management systems, integrating with accounting systems, with operating systems, so that you have this full link between what is in our portfolio and what is it costing us to run this portfolio, what will it cost us to run the portfolio, as well as what are the effects that we see then ultimately in terms of delays, in terms of cancellations, in terms of us as railways being able to perform the role that we've got in society. Then the next, and here we move even more into, let's say, the technology, the predictive part, having systems that really look forward. A lot of the systems we have are descriptive. They collect data, they process data, but they do not look forward in the sense that what happens in 5 years, in 10 years, in 40 years. And a lot of the forecasting, a lot of the analysis in that regard that's going on is usually very ad hoc. It is very, very cumbersome, it's not very effective, and you might get different results every time you do this. So of course it's important to pull this into a very consistent, very, very integrated and automated manner to also establish some kind of really process to look forward here. And lastly, we often run into something that we call an intransparency culture, meaning that we have people that think in silos. They think about, I'm running signaling, I'm running track, not I'm helping the infrastructure as a whole operate. So we have to move beyond that, and as part of that, we also see that oftentimes we see a mindset where being challengeable, being transparent, is seen as a bit of a threat. And of course, that's something we have to change to really become open, and becoming challengeable is also a way to learn and to become better, to integrate across the different portfolio users. So that's really the challenge we also work on. Basically, I would like to conclude with 2 use cases. What can you do once such systems are in place? One is really having a full financial planning, work planning, strategic planning based on data. And that means first having a really good control of your asset database. What do you have? What work is being done on that? I'm actually quite glad to be on a panel here with Dee, because IBM Maximo is one of the systems we work with quite a bit. And once you know what's in your portfolio and integrate that with the condition, with predictive models, with AI models, you get actually some insight on what does this condition mean for our funding needs. And then we get to the question prioritization. Oftentimes we see we cannot have as much funding as we want to do everything we can, or we might not be capable of executing as much maintenance, as much renewal as we want to do for a certain type of work. So we have to prioritize basically what work is going to be the most impactful in keeping the portfolio in a good shape, in achieving the goals as an organization. And this obviously has to be a very, very quantitative process. Just as an anecdote, we come from a world where oftentimes the principle in funding is who yells the loudest gets the most money. Obviously, this isn't something we don't want to have happening. So we have to move that into a data approach, into a quantitative, consistent, and very, very rigorous approach. And this helps you drive your portfolio planning, but also, very importantly, this helps in negotiations with financiers, in Europe, governments. Really drive home the message, how much funding do we as an industry need, when, what for, and what happens if we don't get that funding. This is a key question oftentimes, and we find that data-driven models are very helpful in getting the message across because they're transparent. They have a lot of drill-down capability, creating trust, and trust is something that's really important for being accountable and also spending what effectively is taxpayer money in a good way. Lastly also, and this is one of the questions I think all of you have dealt with in one or the other regard, what happens if we cut funding? And if you have good control of your entire asset life cycle in terms of what happens at a certain time in your entire portfolio, you can actually go in and answer the questions, what happens if I don't get funding today? What's the long-term effect? And there's been multiple cases in which we have been able to show very concretely, if you save on CapEx today, what you'll get is older assets, more work in terms of corrective maintenance, in terms of fault repair, and those OPEX increases, they're going to offset any CapEx increase you have in the long run. So it's very important also drive home that message, or at least make decision makers understand that the savings they do today they have a cost, they have a price tag that's coming in the future. And to conclude, I would like to leave you with, let's say, 5 key messages. One, we have a very long life asset portfolio. Our assets live 30, 40, 50, 100 years, and that means what we decide on today, what we do today, decides cost and work for decades into the future. Our assets live long, so we have to plan very long into the future. That means the decisions we make today have decades of impact. So that means decide today what you do because you're going to be paying for that for 50 years. Then transparency, drill down capabilities, create trust with governments, create trust with the public, because that's how we secure support, that's how we secure funding. And lastly, beware, use railways, your major bias for special services, you drive the market, and that means if you don't control that, you're going to have ineffective situations, you're going to have supply shortages, you have to have price increases, so work with your suppliers, steer them. And this is basically the key takeaways, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing this more with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hermann. Provided that you have a ministry able to hear something, it's a very fruitful tool, able to convince how to fund and how to avoid underfunding. So thank you so much. Now we will continue with a short presentation on artificial intelligence. Why? Because when we talk about asset management, we talk about data, we talk about quality of data, and data, big data, the path is not so far. And is it possible to have the presentation, please? For that, I wrote a leaflet concerning artificial intelligence in UIC because I discovered that when you talk about artificial intelligence with decision makers, they say, wait, we already do that. You do that, yes. And usually it's not the case. There is a confusion between massive computer capabilities and artificial intelligence. It's not the same, so I wanted to find a document explaining in 4 or 5 pages what is artificial intelligence. I didn't find. That's the reason why I wrote it. So, yes, thank you. So you will have the links for this document in 3 languages, German, English, and French. And so just a summary, artificial intelligence, we have 3 topics: machine learning, natural language processing, and robotics. Today, in Europe, because I focused on Europe for this leaflet, the main deployments are today image recognition in the fight against terrorism, chatbots and virtual assistants for passengers, and sales predictions through machine learning. You have some experience for robotics in railway stations, with robots explaining, giving information to passengers. To be frank, it's not very spread. You have robotics in trains, not only able to wash, to clean up the trains. It's very useful if you want to fight against virus. And you have robotics in warehouses. It's possible to give the right spare part to the worker. It's more efficient if you have robots to transport them. We have decided in UIC to focus on a project concerning predictive maintenance. I discovered that there was a confusion between predictive maintenance and condition-based maintenance. If you read the ISO standards, there are today 3 types of maintenance. Breakdown maintenance, you perform the maintenance after a machine has failed. Preventive maintenance, you avoid a failure by systematic operations. And condition-based maintenance, it's an approach of a preventive maintenance performed as governed by condition monitoring programs. But predictive maintenance is something else. Thanks to advanced statistical methods, such as machine learning, it's possible to set up predictive maintenance. So you predict the future breakdowns by giving a probability, whereas condition-based maintenance prevents additional breakdown cost by telling you something is wrong now. So condition-based maintenance, you have a problem now. Predictive maintenance, you will have a problem. It's not possible to apply predictive maintenance to everything because the collection of data could be expensive. You have to choose the use cases for predictive maintenance. And you need many data. Today, we have some programs able to collect in Europe many data. The Orbis program in UK, the automated tunnel examinations, the track machine vision systems, the robots able to automate inspections, the aerial monitoring of railways using drones, and the data analytics. You have some examples of collection of data thanks to drones in France. And after the collection of images, they use machine learning. What is important, it is a figure from the US government. There is a difference between data and information. You need to collect data, and the quality of collection is very important. After, you have to transform the data into an information. And information is useful for taking a decision. And that is the reason why the role of experts will remain crucial for several years to come. Artificial intelligence by itself means nothing. Artificial plus experts, artificial plus human, yes. And so the role of experts will be to select the data to be collected when you have a lake of data. Which data is useful for you? Only the experts are able to say, I want this data, I don't want this one. You have to assist data scientists. The data scientists will choose the appropriate algorithm, but the experts will say, with this algorithm, the information is useful, it seems to be appropriate. With the other algorithm, the information is not appropriate. So for choosing the best algorithm, you need both data scientists and experts. And after, you will need experts to help the data engineers, because data engineers will have to transform data in appropriate information in information systems. And so your experts will be useful for that. And after, they will have to take decision. And you cannot accept, when you work on safety, you cannot accept a black box to decide. The black box, the artificial intelligence, give you information from data, and you take the decision. The human will take the decision. If you do that, it will be possible to obtain authorization to place artificial intelligence on the market for safety cases, if you consider as a whole the human-machine system. You explain the quality, your pyramid, how to take decision. It is some sort of pyramid in another sense, and but it's totally linked. So now I would like to give the floor to Dee. And you don't have presentation, but you will present and continue the discussion.
Sure. Well, good morning. Hopefully you've realized that this is a pretty deep topic first thing in the morning. So hopefully we can create some lively discussion. I think the very first thing I wanted to share is really rail is a rich environment for driving impact with open and trusted AI. I think that's the very first thing. Rail has plenty of data. There's lack of information. And that would be one core topic, is rail has plenty of opportunities versus other industries. So I want to be very clear, is we have the heavy maintenance, we have rolling stock, we have passenger, there's all sorts of different areas you can gather data from. And that's one of the problems I believe we have in rail, and I'll come back to that. Number two, we did a poll about how many people believe, how many executives believe that AI is important. So maybe just within this room, since we have a little bit more than we thought this morning, let me ask a question. How many of you believe that AI is important to your organization? Okay? So, perfect. We roughly gathered about 70% of executives believe that AI is an important issue. Now let me ask another question. How many of you believe that you've actually received or benefited from results? And I'll even throw in analytics. So do you believe you've really benefited from analytics or AI? By show of hands. Okay. What about just straight AI? How many hands? Just even on simplex AI? Great. We have 3-4 people. So roughly about 2% of executives believe that the vision of AI has been, that they've benefited from that. So the bottom line is there's a big gap. One of the things I wanted to highlight, and I was really impressed with Hermann's presentation, I was just taking some notes over here. Hopefully you caught it. And if you've ever been in a position to have to convince people about, particularly your CFO or the financiers, how do you communicate the importance of investing in rail infrastructure? How do you do that? Honestly, I thought it was very good if as I understood it, Hermann, you had talked about there's a 15% that is not optimized, right? So you have essentially 15% of dollars or of money that is not being optimized because we can't explain the value to the financiers. Did I get that right? I think it was pretty close to that, right?
It's probably, you look at the data and you see basically, you get in, you see what's the long-term impact of optimizing your maintenance, and that's what we've seen in the cases that we've been able to work on data.
Okay, 15%. Let me ask a question. In the audience, have you ever gone to your CFO to say, because we're not optimized in investing in our maintenance, because of we're not able to sweat our assets, you know, I think you said a 25% number on being able to, you know, leverage the life of the asset. I think you talked about 30% the supply chain issues. These are big dollars. When we're talking about billions of dollars, let me just say, even within the rail community, and I've seen it, again, I was you know, on the executive board at Amtrak, the opportunity to optimize this is significant. And I want to be very clear that while we talk about AI and analytics, it's all about using those tools as business outcome. And if we're letting 15% sit on the table, then we have to do a better job of convincing our financiers or our CFO to be able to invest in where we know there are dollars. So I think that was number one. Just from an IBM perspective, I'll just briefly, and then Christian, of course, I'm sure you've got some questions as well, but from an AI, it's really a maturity game, right? We talk about data and analytics. What we see is companies talk about that I have certain capabilities in analytics, but the fact remains that if you don't have your data in order and you haven't invested in the ability to truly understand your data, I'm going to generalize that because there's many aspects of that, but if you don't have the architectures that are in place around your data, you will never get to the ability to truly drive effective AI. And when additional computing power comes available to you, like quantum computers, some of you know that IBM is very vested in that, then you will not be able to leverage the power. So let me be very clear, the maturity of where you are, we call this the AI ladder, and there is a specific step of maturity. So one of the things I wanted to share is, while it's easy to talk about the architecture, the data, I get information, yeah, we're pretty good at silos. But the fact is, if we don't have this ability to be able to drive this maturity, and that means people, oftentimes, it's obviously systems and processes as well, but think about, we're rail companies. How many times have you heard your CEO say that we're not a technology company? Well, I can tell you when I first started, okay, well, when I first started Amtrak, our CEO, I won't name him any names, did not use a computer for email. And we're talking, this is, I won't say exactly when, but 2015 plus. What I'm saying is, we have to look at ourselves in the rail industry and make sure that we understand how to leverage these tools and systems. But the people, I can't explain how important having people that are analytically focused, that can help you mature. And you need to have them in every aspect of the business. They can't just be in IT. They can't just be in the heavy maintenance. They have to be across the business, and you have to create a community for them to help you gain maturity. Those are a couple of topics that I figured we'd share, and I'm happy to explain more about what IBM does, or even more about our thoughts about AI and the future of AI as well.
Thank you, Dee. I suggest, do you have questions to Hermann or to Dee? Yes. You're present?
I represent Swiss Federal Railways. One comment to Hermann, of course, we are working very happily with AFRY since years, and I really liked the talk. But I think generally it was, we were at a very good quality level of your inputs, and following up on what was just said is, from an executive perspective, how do you create this awareness that if you want to increase data quality and kind of this analytics capability, this is a long-term endeavor, it takes, I would say, at least 5 years. Same situation at Swiss Federal Railways. In general, data quality is not where it is. So it always sounds a little bit, dishonest if you at the same time start to talk about AI. And my main question is, because you see that there's no incentive, let's say, for top management to start the effort of cleaning up data. It's like, it feels like like a lower task, I think. It's something like that. Do you have any experience on how to kind of make this a big subject, kind of this boring, getting good data subject for top management?
I think Hermann and Dee, you will answer because you have different experiences. So Hermann.
I think that's a really good question. Right now we're doing a quite major data quality improvement program for a European railway. And the question is exactly, how do you sell this to management? Because it's a huge endeavor, it's going to take years and tons and tons and tons of manpower. So effectively, the two things we work with is make clear that you have the benefits right from the beginning on a very granular level, have very, very tangible benefits. Fixing this data item is going to improve traffic planning, going to reduce delays by X%. Obviously, slapping a number on something is not something that's easy. So that's one task. And the second is, when you start small, build momentum, get some success in quite early so that they can see there's quite something to be gained here, and then ramp up and go big once you've established that there's a clear benefit to doing this task.
Thank you, Hermann. Did you explain the benefits, but how do you convince when you were, for instance, in Amtrak? How do you convince?
Yeah, it's a great question. And while I would love to expound on the topic of why don't CEOs or CFOs understand the value, I think it would be beneficial to talk about and look at ourselves. If we can't justifiably explain the benefit, we can't just say, and I've seen it time and time again, where we've gone to the CFO or the CEO to say, invest in analytic capabilities. And we use all sorts of things. But when you're a CEO and a CFO, you're looking at dollars. You have a fixed amount of money, and you're saying, how do I get the best return on that money? If we can't justify, and it's easy to say, well, I was at a conference and Hermann did a great job of explaining that if I don't sweat my asset, it's 25%. What I would recommend is if you don't have that capability in-house, you find people like Hermann, you find people like IBM to come in and help you very specifically identify what is your rate. Is it 25%? Because there's an algorithm behind that 25%. Have you used that algorithm to show your CFO or your CEO why it's important? They're very business focused, right? They're going to be very focused, but oftentimes that I see technology, and let me give a personal experience, and this is one that I will share that I don't believe was my biggest success, right? So I'll be very open and transparent here. We had plenty of money. This was during the Obama years, as you know, in rail in the US, created quite a bit of energy, and we had an infrastructure bill that we were able to take advantage of. We had plenty of money, fortunately. Now, at that time, we said, we're going to go do the very first enterprise data warehouse. And we had the ability, and we had money set aside to go do the enterprise data warehouse. The very first version of that enterprise data warehouse was driven by IT. And I can tell you, when we had our first set of steering committee meetings, the concern from the business was this has become an IT science project. How many has heard that before? Okay. So I guess my point goes back. This is not an easy concept. And the reason I said you have to embed people with capabilities in all aspects of the business, you have to make sure it is delivering business benefit. And I love the way that Hermann talks about get that momentum going. But I can tell you, if you can't convince people, you need to be looking at yourself and the algorithm you're using to convince people. I don't believe it's because of the CEOs and CFOs. While I would like to talk about them as well, the fact is I think we have more to do to explain. I think, Hermann, you did a great job of talking about that.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you so much. Other questions?
Good morning. You presented the difference between condition monitoring or condition maintenance and predictive maintenance. I've been working in condition monitoring for a long time, and sometimes there's this perception that predictive maintenance is the goal. But if we can tell you, though, there's minor race damage on one of the bearings, it needs replacing in the next 5 to 10 months, there's not much added value in trying to predict precisely when the bearing will fail. It's set on the path. We can tell you it's damaged, but I don't think you need predictive maintenance to potentially get the date of failure wrong. So the question is, can you give me a really good use case for predictive maintenance?
Yes. For instance, you have some switches which are crucial for the operations. If your switch is out of order in the morning, just at the entrance of the main station, you stop everything. So it's very important to adapt your operations, to adapt your maintenance, and if you can predict that in 2 or 3 weeks, you will have problems. And if you avoid this problem, you could avoid big problems in the morning during rush hours for instance, for mass transit. And that's the reason why there are some already existing devices based on artificial intelligence for switches. And for instance, switches is the first cost of failures for infrastructure in railways.
Thank you.
But you are right, predictive maintenance may be expensive, and it's not, we have to avoid predictive maintenance for everything, because the collection of data is very expensive, and you have to compare the costs and the benefits. But for switches, no problem.
Hermann, I don't know if you have anything. I'm happy to chime in on this. This is one of personal interest as well. Let me talk about computing and technology. Because right now we're dealing in linear pieces. Like we have the linear assets in rail, our computing methods today are linear, meaning if, then, do this. They're all, and how fast your computers are is all based on processing ones and zeros, correct? That's how it is today. Now the challenge is, in predictive maintenance, you need enough data to be able to sense, to understand the life of, so you need to have lots of different failures, you need to have lots of different areas where you can then predict a life, you know, the life of that part. So it's really challenging to get an AI system in the current world based on this linear approach, because you have to have a whole lot of data. Does that make sense? So oftentimes we're learning. So we actually did with Korean Airlines, it's not in rail, but we actually did a very specific, we created an AI algorithm based on that. And the challenge is the data. You have to have data of failures, not just of assets that are working, right? It's all about the failures, how often and how many, right? So it's all about then planning, trying to predict. But let me just give one thing that's unique. And this starts getting into the future of AI. Right now we have what's called narrow AI. We're using this linear approach. We're trying to gather all the data we can get, and we're trying to then understand what we can do to predict and trying to find patterns. Now, in what we call general AI, you'll see this. Elon Musk was actually, there were some arguments on Twitter, if you follow this at all, about the fact that general AI opens up a very new approach to AI. Let me tell you the difference. So we know the linear. General AI starts thinking about your eyes, right? So when you look out in the audience or you look at someone, you have peripheral vision, right? Your mind is able to process things that may not be in your focus area. It's not processing in a linear fashion, right? I'm seeing out the side over here, and if I actually see some activity like something's coming to hit me, I'll notice it. But I'm not focused on it, right? This is a broader pattern that our minds can do that computers cannot. We're still in the model. Now, let me give you just a little bit of glimpse into quantum computing, which is pretty close. It's not that far out. In the next decade, we will see initial algorithms. But the point I'd like to make is the difference between today's AI and general AI that you'll hear in the Elon Musks and everybody else in the world is that difference. You'll be able to sense. So let me give you a sense. Right now, we have a lot of IoT sensors. And my hypothesis is while sensors are wonderful, they are a linear-based mechanism to get data. As some of us have actually experienced, video will be the next generation. As many of us know, the networks have not been able to support high-resolution video. You do that in very limited areas. But as you're able to use video and to be able to then identify what are the aspects, whether it be rail, are they fit in, are the parts actually working to the specs? It won't be IoT monitors, in my opinion. I think they'll be video, right? Where then the AI can process this in a way, and you can program computers to be able to sense and learn patterns that may not be in the linear focus. Does that make sense? trying to give a bit of a sense of how important I believe video and the translation of video in AI will be. And I think it'll drive automated vehicles. We know about AGVs and other things. It'll be very important for rail to get on top of this early because it'll be of high value for you.
Thank you. Other question?
Well, I have a question for Dee, actually. You said you asked executives about the role of AI, and 70% said they see a benefit. So what's with the other 30% there?
Yeah, I believe that it's our ineffectiveness to be able to explain clearly the value. Because every CFO that you probably know and I probably know don't just buy the very first number that you give them, correct? They start asking questions. Well, why is it that? And if you haven't done your homework, it becomes very obvious that you haven't done your homework. Is that fair? I think that's the biggest gap that I see, that we're and literally coming up with the 35% on even sweating assets, using general numbers don't work with CFOs. When they're having to make real decisions between, do I spend this 100 or 100,000 euros or €1 million in this versus that, they have to be confident. Their job's on the line about making best use of that money. So you're going to be asking, just like you do at home, if you're doing some job at home and you're spending money, I hope most of us will be asking very detailed questions, especially if you're doing 100,000 euros at your home, maybe doing some big job. I think that's the gap. That's one of the big gaps, in my opinion.
Thank you. Maybe just as an anecdote, then I think this is a good point. Being able to follow up on numbers, right? And being able to, if you have that 25%, where is it coming from? Just one anecdote we've seen recently from our clients, very concrete catenary systems. They renewed them every 50 years because that's what the supplier said. They looked at then the failure rates for old equipment. They found they can easily go up to 75 years. That's 50% more. That's a huge saving on the investment. So that's how you can use data to drive in and actually do your homework, like you say, and underpin those numbers.
Yeah, that's a great example on the catenary. If CFOs know what is the history of our company, of the catenary components, whatever it may be, of the failure rate, and I have X number, I'm explaining and having, and I call it open AI, having an open algorithm with a CFO talking about why and explaining that, everyone that I've seen is very focused on, if I'm going to have to spend more money later, but I don't want to just replace a toilet or replace some catenary part because you want me to do it. They want more.
A last question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk, and especially focusing on the financial aspects. And one topic I'd like to hear your thoughts about is, if we're talking about AI projects for infrastructure managers, we sure all know that we'll have to invest, as you said, thousands to millions of euros to set these up. And I'm wondering, why should I, as an infrastructure manager, as I only buy systems and just operate them, why should I do these investments? Where are the predictive maintenance as a service models provided by the suppliers? And why should I try to set up an AI system over all my different setups and all my different suppliers I got from several vendors? And do have to integrate them. I don't think that that's a job of an infrastructure manager, and it's not a capability he can handle. But I also wonder why there are no products available from the market which are exactly focusing on that topic. And I'm not talking about integration data platforms as Splunk or Power BI. I'm talking about predictive maintenance or data-driven maintenance as a service who does all of these topics for me for a flat fee, so I don't have to do these high invests to set up these capabilities.
Predictive maintenance is one of the use cases for artificial intelligence. So there are two questions. Do we need to invest on predictive maintenance? Do we need to invest on artificial intelligence? For predictive maintenance, we have to focus. Only a few use cases will be fruitful. Condition-based maintenance could be better most of the time, but from time to time, with this example of switches, crucial switches, predictive maintenance is better for reliability, for punctuality, for safety, and as an infrastructure manager, you have to provide reliability, punctuality, safety. After, do we need to have such a capability or anything else as a service? If you have a provider who is able to provide service, so he provides an information and you take the decision. In case of accident, who is responsible? If we talk about switches, we had a derailment in France, in Brittany, and there is a judgment today. Who is responsible? If you have something as a service which provides an information to the infrastructure manager, and the infrastructure manager doesn't have the data because he only has the results of a service, and you have a derailment, what will you explain to the judge? So we could say, I don't want to invest in artificial intelligence. Okay, you have a lake of data, you don't use it, you lose 15% of money and you don't know why, and you have a subcontractor. I had discussion with subcontractors and I asked this question, are you responsible or the infrastructure manager? I'm waiting for the answer. So as an infrastructure manager, I must invest in artificial intelligence because I am responsible for the result. I can subcontract, provided that I keep the responsibility.
Can I give a different approach to that real quick? Two things. Just before this, I think this is a really important point. We have not been able to convince ourselves that we have the capabilities in engineering to be able to do this. We've also not seen it in the marketplace. Let me give you two concepts that I believe can change the dynamic. Number one, we've seen open source. You've seen the world of open source. There's a real push around open AI. You've heard me use those terms, open AI. The world wants to have a transparent algorithm of why. I think Rail, so that's number one. The second is crowdsource. We've heard this before. We've seen even Andres with Hyperloop, and I know we're about out of time here, but Andres De Leon from Hyperloop TT, their business model is based on a crowd-funded. I mean, they're actively licensing, partnering with partners who are the best in the world. So the thing is around getting others to help. I would recommend, when was the last time that Rail actually let partners have access to data? We're all so scared that partners are going to go and take that and do a startup and make a whole lot of money. Well, if we're in a situation where we can't do it ourselves, we're not seeing marketplace activity from proprietary vendors, I would have you consider the open sourcing of potential data, the crowdsourcing of innovation around this space, and I have not seen it in Rail. We love to talk about Rail. We love to be about Rail. We heard a whole topic around multimodal yesterday that's beyond Rail. I still don't know why we in Rail only think about Rail. We've got to get to that last mile, and I think it's the same thing in data. If we don't have these open concepts willing to partner with others, we're not going to get ahead of it like we could in the next few years. My opinion.
Thank you very much. Time is over. Sorry for, we could have discussion after. So thank you very much, Dee. Thank you very much, Hermann. And